In this video I want to walk you through a little frame design that I worked on over the weekend. It's a H-quad design, and my intent is to have a cheap DIY FPV quadcopter. Now if you fly FPV or have flown, you'll know that normally with all your gear and your frame and everything, you could easily spend several $100s. And in my opinion, the problem with that is FPV isn't easy to get started with, and you definitely don't want to crash an expensive multi-rotor. So like I said, I worked on this frame over the weekend. It weighs 70 grams, and you may already be familiar with my DIY mini quadcopter. And so this FPV H-quad is kind of an evolution of the mini quad, mainly because I've been wanting to do FPV on a 3D printable quad. Just in case I crash, it's easy to replace parts, but finally got around to doing the design. Still a work in progress. From center of motor to center of motor, it's about 9 inches or 230 millimeters. And what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to mount the electronics and just see if we can get this in the air, because I have concerns that the booms might have too much vibration, and who knows whether or not this frame is rigid enough to support all the gear. So let's take a look. So I've gone ahead and mounted the motors. Now let me point out one thing that I hope to improve with this design. In my previous design with the mini quad, I used zip ties to hold these Turnigy motors on, and that's what I'm doing here. But if you notice, there are actually holes in that mount that you could put a nut and bolt through. And for the build, I'm using this M3 by 8mm long hex nut. And one thing I need to improve in the design, you'll see that it goes through the bottom arm, through this plate, into this 3D printed spacer. But the thickness of this is 3mm, 3mm, so that's 6. So there's only 2mm going into that spacer, so I'll definitely need to improve that. And one other thing I want to point out about this frame, this top plate, bottom plate, booms, all of these are 3mm thick, printed in PLA at 25% infill. So still a little bit of flex, but we'll see if this will hold up to any sort of vibration. So now I'm going to go ahead and mount ESCs in the multi-Wii flight controller. Okay, so I have everything wired up to the frame. Now I have wires going everywhere, zip ties, but this is really just a proof of concept to see if I can get this thing in the air, and then I'll continue to tweak. And I don't actually have the FPV gear wired up yet, just have it in place so we can get a good feel for weight and how this thing handles. It's 320 grams, so frame by itself was about 70, so that's about 250 grams of electronics. We have the multi-Wii. CG is pretty locked in the middle. And let me just mention, these are the 5x3 props that I fly on the mini quad, 2000 kV Turnigy motors. Now these are all 2S motors, so I think ultimately I want to go with 3S, but let's see how this does, and then we can talk about any sort of improvements. So I'm going to arm and give a little bit of throttle. Okay, we got a spin. It's good. Here we go. So we're hovering at about 75%. So this quad is definitely a little bit heavier than what it should be, or on the flip side, we need a little bit more power to get this guy handling a little better. So it handles fairly well. So that wasn't too bad of a first flight. Definitely underpowered, so there's some things we can do. I can definitely get a smaller transmitter to shed some weight. I think we're probably going to need to upgrade motors. I'd like to see this on a 3S system. I do have these iPower motors. They support a 3S battery, so I'm definitely going to give those a try. See if we can get some more thrust. And in the next video, I plan on getting the FPV system wired up so we can test that out. But ultimately, I want to get the build log, all the electronics in a good place, and post the 3D files on Thingiverse for you guys to download and then do your own build. But before we get there, I have a few things to sort through. And once again, my intent with this build is for everyone to have access to a relatively inexpensive DIY FPV trainer, just so that you don't have to wreck your QAV or your TBS and spend a lot of money repairing it. So I hope that was useful. If you guys have any questions, comments, or suggestions on things you'd like to see, or maybe things I can do to improve this build, let me know. I'd love to hear them. And until next time, thanks for watching.